There are some churches that read the law or the Ten Commandments every single Sunday morning in church. And they do this because reciting the Ten Commandments serves two purposes. One, of convicting people of their sin, but also to lay out the guidelines for how we should live. I think if you repeat it every Sunday, it starts to be like reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in school or singing the national anthem before a baseball game, and we're not going to talk about football players kneeling, just forget that. You just kind of do it by rote and get through it. It doesn't require a lot to think about it. Can you imagine how different it was that very first time? At Sinai, in the middle of the harsh and that terrible wilderness, when God spoke all those words on that long day, narrated for us in the 20th chapter of Exodus. Can you imagine the words and the sound of the words really blew the people away? The reading tells us there was smoke on the mountain as the sound of Yahweh's majestic voice shook the roots of the mountain and caused the Israelites a kind of terror they had rarely known before. The people were quite undone by God having spoken all those words to them. Nobody slouched in the pew that day or fell asleep. No one heard these words as a familiar buzzing in their ears. And no one, not Moses or Aaron or Joshua or anyone else, needed to gussy up the words to get people's attention. The words very nearly laid waste to the entire landscape around the mountainside. And it was as frightening to those Israelites as if it was a dangerous tornado swirling their way. I can imagine that day, what that encounter must have been like for those Israelites. Now, it wasn't like sitting in an IMAX theater where the sight and the sound are almost overpowering. I believe what they encountered was a raw holiness. That holiness where the ground in which you are standing is so sacred you want to take your shoes off. What they encountered was the presence of their Creator, the Creator of our heaven and our earth, entering creation so as to give out, for the first time in a sustained way, a blueprint for living and thriving in the cosmos of God, the one that God had set up at the beginning of time. What happened in the 20th chapter of Exodus was a collision of the unstained and utterly pure God of the galaxies with a world that had quite badly gone off the rails for the very reasons that would get spelled out in the law that God spoke in all of these sacred words. In other words, what the people encountered and what really blew not just their hair back, but their very sensibilities was God's vision for life as it should be and as it could be. The people encountered a goodness, a holiness, shalom. They encountered in all those words a vision that was powerful in its beauty. God was truly shaping God's people, preparing them to enter into the promised land. There in the wilderness they had traveled, and God was working to mold a people who were finally truly free from slavery and able to undertake the responsibilities of life and community with God and one another. No longer were they slaves in Egypt being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it. They had to be set free, though, even though once they had exited the land, they still had slavery attitudes and mindset. The journey through the wilderness and toward Mount Sinai is the process of God's persistent effort to interrupt the habits of slavery. God institutes a day of rest when giving instructions about gathering up their daily bread. Never again will Israel become so breathless in their work that the spirit of new life cannot blow among them. Do we keep our Sabbath holy? It's not because of the rule or the law, it's for our benefit. God also encourages Moses to share the leadership so that no one human leader will ever be regarded to be as indispensable as God. Sounds like good advice to me. Amen. And then at Sinai, God begins to utter out the words, and God reminds the people, I am the Lord your God, and I'm the one who brought you out of slavery, out of Egypt, and instructs them, you shall have no other gods before me. Not because God is a jealous and vengeful God, because having multiple gods in your life is not healthy, is not sustainable. Far from being a demand from a jealous and insecure God, this first commandment lays the foundation for the freedom that God desires for humanity. And that is the freedom to live out their lives as one who is formed in the divine image of God. This is the critical reorientation required in recovering from the psychological state of enslavement that they had encountered and lived. So why do the Ten Commandments matter today? The foundation of this divine law is that it liberates humanity from the responsibility to worship anything other than God. It is not hard to know that other gods, with a little g, that demand reverence and allegiance of people today. Certainly our global capitalist system claims itself to be the invisible hand which can right all social woes and advance human flourishing. Is there a bug? Yes. The governments of nations and states demand the allegiance and obedience of their citizens. And there is nothing in God's commandment that on its own would prevent people from participating in these systems. In other words, you can't go out and break the law of the land, of the government. It is not God's desire that we never act as consumers or citizens of the world in which we live. Rather, it is God's insistence that our responsibility to God's authority is the only responsibility that we regard as absolute. Our identity as the children of God, our responsibility to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly, and to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, is to take priority over any of the demands made on us by the state. This is the meaning of the prologue to God's law. If we pledge our allegiance to a false god or to some worldly notion that parades as a cosmic absolute, we risk becoming like those breathless Israelites, unable to hear God's call toward liberation and redemption. Now, my sermon title is The Los Lunes Stone. Anybody ever heard of the Los Lunes Stone? Two. It's also now, it's in Los Lunes, which I had to go to pick up. If you remember last week, I was telling you how my granddaughter sent me on a wild goose chase to Bosque Farms when she was on a street, Camino del Bosque, 10 minutes from my house. So I got a little tour again. The Los Lunes Stone is also known as Commandment Rock, and it's a large rock inscribed with some of the commandments. And it's located at Hidden Mountain. I've never heard of Hidden Mountain here. It's about 35 miles south of Albuquerque. And because of the stone's weight of over 80 tons, it was never moved to a museum or even to a laboratory for studying and safekeeping. Now, I'm sure well-meaning visitors have cleaned the stone's inscriptions over the years. But in doing that, they destroyed any possibility for any kind of scientific analysis. But it's estimated that the inscription could be between 500 and 2,000 years old. Could be. However, there is an urban legend about this rock. It is based on an inscription in the rock saying Eva and Hobe 3:13:30. Now, Eva and Hobe are reputed to have been anthropology majors at the University of New Mexico. And supposedly they created this Los Lunes Stone. They're the ones that inscribed on it, and it got found out. They were allegedly told that if they ever did anything like that again, then their careers in the field of anthropology were over. Inquiries at UNM have been unable to pin down this urban legend as anything more than just an urban legend or oral tradition. If you want to go see the stone, you have to get a $25 permit. I thought it was very interesting, though. You know, we fight over the 10 Commandments. If they could or should be displayed in government buildings or in schools, people fight about that and say, well, we're a Christian nation. However, I believe that we're a nation of many faiths.
Oh, yeah.
And if we're going to have the 10 Commandments, then we need to have other important scriptures or sacred verse from other faiths displayed also. That's just the way it is. We live in a diverse country, which I truly relish and enjoy.
Amen.
I don't want to be with everybody believing the same thing and acting the same way.
That'll never happen.
As I was preparing for this, I knew I had to say something, though, about the mass shooting, which took place in Las Vegas last Sunday night. And several pastors were on Facebook saying they still did not know. It was Saturday night, and they said, I still don't know what I'm going to say. This mass shooting took out more lives than the shooting in Orlando a year and a half ago. So now this one has the dubious title of the largest mass killing in modern American history. Notice I've added the modern American history because of the Native Americans that were killed in mass. The 64-year-old white male shooter in Las Vegas, despite being a psychopath who puts Charles Manson to shame, has, even in death, I believe, reaped the benefits of his whiteness. Had a black man, or a Hispanic man, or a Muslim man committed the same heinous act, the whole dialogue around the shooting would be 180 degrees different. The shrieks for border walls and travel bans and rounding up all of the terrorists without due process would be deafening.
Oh, yeah.
And while the police and experts, family and friends try to discover a reason, a motive, or something, I believe he did it just because he wanted to, and because he could. After all, he owned 40-something assault rifles. We like to talk about gun rights, but what about the right to attend a public concert without being murdered in cold blood by a maniac with an arsenal? What about the rights of 20-year-old Quentin Robbins, who was just starting his life working as a recreation assistant and coaching his little brother's football team, whose life was cut short in Las Vegas for nothing? Or Michelle Vo, only 32, from San Jose, California, a recent graduate from the University of California, who was attending her very first country music festival before she was gunned down. Or what about the rights of Angie Gomez, who graduated high school just 2 years ago in Riverside, California, and was training to become a nurse? Or what about Rocio of Eastvale, California, who was still on maternity leave from her job as a pizza parlor manager after giving birth to her fourth child just 6 weeks ago, who was shot and killed? Where were her rights? What about the rights of 34-year-old Carrie, who's an employee of Disneyland, who was shot in the chest? Or Chris, a 28-year-old Navy veteran who served in Afghanistan and survived, who was also shot in the chest? What about their right not to be shot in cold blood? I will not listen to lawmakers, those in Washington, those who have the power to change our laws. Notice I'm not saying take away guns. It's not what this is about. Tell us after the next shooting that their thoughts and their prayers are with the victims. I find it very hollow and very offensive. I believe as Americans we've now entered into a kind of forced social contract whereby we have agreed to be targets for mass shootings every minute of the day, so that those who want to have assault rifles can exercise their rights to have
All
them.
right, preaching about it.
And I feel very strongly about this.
Nobody needs those.
I'm not done. I don't want to take away your handgun. I don't want to take away your rifle. But nobody needs an assault rifle. And us as a community of faith, we are the salt, the light of the world. We can make a change. We can make a difference. I don't understand why people haven't just risen up in anger and rage and say, you must do something. We demand it. You're working for us. So I'm going to urge you to write, to call, to text your legislators and ask for some common sense gun regulations. Get assault rifles off the streets. We don't need them. What's wrong with having some background checks of people who are purchasing weapons?
Amen.
What about having some common sense restrictions on the amount of ammunition you can buy at one time? You know, the 10 Commandments state, you shall not murder. I pray that one day God would just speak out, yes, with fire and brimstone. I never thought I'd say those words. And add a P.S., folks, to the 10 Commandments. Or maybe say this is commandment number 11, since you all don't seem to be getting it. Thou shalt not own or create weapons of mass destruction.
All right.
And maybe we're supposed to be the voice of God. Maybe we can become a voice of reason in the insanity that I find us living in. I think of my 16-year-old granddaughter. I don't know if I could send her off to a concert or to an event and not be filled with a fear, is she going to come back safe or not? And I don't want to live like that. If we truly were a Christian nation, as some people like to tout, spout off about, then let's start acting like it. Why do the 10 Commandments matter? I believe it's kind of a foundation of some divine principles that liberates us from the responsibility to have to worship anything other than the one true God. You don't have to worship guns or violence, greed. You know, the other gods with the little g, the gods of greed and capitalism, power, money, they demand a lot. And God knew this when God created us and saw how the world was evolving. And I believe God said, I'm the one true God. Worship me. Then I can worship all these other little gods that won't give you any return for your money. Talk about low interest rates these days.
Amen.
The little gods will give you no return for your reverence or your allegiance to them. Some of you might disagree with me, and I will respect that. You can come and tell me I'm full of it, whatever, and we can talk about it. But we need to do something. We just can't sit by and allow this to continue. Next month, what's the next number going to be? 60, 65, 70, 75. Each time it goes up and up, because the next one says, well, he did 58, 59. I've got to do more than that. Don't be afraid.
Amen.
As you go out and do things, make sure you tell your loved ones that you love them, you care for them. Be bold and full of courage. Be a voice of reason in this insanity that we find ourselves in. Look at the 10 Commandments. They do have some good guidelines there. And our God is not a vengeful God. Our God is a loving and kind God. And I believe God is weeping with humanity during this time. the arrogance, the destruction of the planet, the violence that we find ourselves living in. We're supposed to be bringing about the realm of God here on earth, the living in shalom with peace and love and harmony with one another. And somehow we've got to get back to that. And it starts with us. We're the ones that have to set the guidelines, the example. This is heavy on my heart. And I know that God is pushing me, urging me to do something. And I don't know what that is, if it's a letter writing campaign or what, but I feel very passionate about this, about not just sitting back and allowing things to happen anymore. Maybe go to the city of Albuquerque when they get the new mayor and say, what about if we started in our city outlawing assault rifles, just in our city? What about that? What if we just started to set an example? Just did it step by step and try to set an example for other cities. Australia solved their problem right off. I don't know if you know about that. I think it was 1993 or 96 they had a mass shooting. Their government right to task, and they offered to buy back rifles and guns and assault rifles and things, and they haven't had any mass shootings since then.
Amen.
Will you pray with me, please? Beloved God, I know that you have blessed us with a beautiful planet and a wonderful country to live in. We have so much freedom here, and yet, God, the ones that have been brutally murdered, I believe they cry out for justice. This will not happen again. Help us to feel moved to do something, be it to call one of our lawmakers, write a letter, send a text, and ask them just to make some common sense gun laws. Teach us that the 10 Commandments were not given to us by an unjust God, but a God who loves us and cares for us and who desires us to live in shalom. Be with each person here today, oh God. We all have our demons and our challenges that we face. Remind us that Jesus is always there, leading us and guiding us, taking our hand. Empower us, oh God, to be a bold people, a holy people, a tribe of people that are passionate and burning with fire and love for you. And we say this in your many names. Amen and amen. God bless you.